My coworker ridiculed my single mother every day. He didn't realize he was dating her other daughter. Oh my God. You guys are not going to believe this story. Picture this. The man who'd spent 6 months making my professional life a living hell. The absolute monster I dreaded seeing every single day. He walked into a restaurant and was introduced as my beloved sister's perfect new boyfriend. Can you even imagine the shock? The absolute betrayal? My world shattered that night, and the confrontation that followed changed everything. For what felt like an eternity, 6 agonizing months, my coworker, Brendan, was my personal tormentor at the accounting firm. Every single morning, like clockwork, he'd stroll past my desk, making these awful, loud comments about how people raised by single mothers lacked discipline and structure. He'd look directly at me, a smirk playing on his lips, knowing full well my mom raised me alone. I'd mentioned it once on my first day during introductions. He weaponized it. He'd bring it up in meetings, too. Maybe we should double-check my work, he'd say, since studies show children from broken homes make more errors. He'd actually cite these fake statistics, these utterly baseless claims about single-parent kids being less reliable employees. It was infuriating. Then I got promoted before him. The look on his face. But then he started telling everyone it was obviously a diversity hire, that companies just felt sorry for people with sob stories. He'd imply my mom probably worked multiple dead-end jobs, and that's why I didn't understand professional standards. Whenever I brought my lunch from home, he'd make these disgusting jokes about food stamps and government assistance. One day, he actually had the audacity to ask if my mom taught me to pack lunches, or if that was something I learned from the state when she was too busy with her other kids from different fathers. He didn't even know I was an only child at the time, which just showed how little he cared about the truth. The absolute worst? When he found out I'd started at a community college before transferring to university. He announced it to our entire department, loudly proclaiming that community college was where single moms sent their kids when they couldn't afford real education. He said my mother probably cleaned houses or worked at a gas station, and that's why I was so desperate to prove myself at work. He'd leave articles on my desk, highlighted, about the psychological damage of growing up without a father, focusing on parts about trust issues and inability to form stable relationships. He even told our manager I probably had anger problems from my unstable childhood and shouldn't be given high-stress projects. He started making up elaborate, fictional backstories for my mom, complete with multiple boyfriends and poor life choices, spreading these vile rumors like they were fact. I was living this nightmare. Every day was a fresh new hell. Then, out of nowhere, my sister Rebecca invited me to dinner. She was glowing. "You have to meet him," she gushed. She'd been dating someone for 4 months, keeping it quiet because she wanted to be sure it was serious. She said he was perfect, successful, came from a good family, treated her like a queen. She was so excited for me to meet him. He was eager to meet her family, since she'd told him so much about us. I walked into the restaurant that night a little nervous, a lot happy for my sister, and then I saw him, sitting at our table. Brendan. His smug confidence drained from his face, turning its sheet white in seconds. Rebecca, completely oblivious, introduced him. "This is Brendan, my amazing boyfriend," she chirped. She had no idea we worked together. I'd never mentioned his name, only ever calling him the office jackass when I complained about work. Brendan actually tried to shake my hand like we were strangers, like none of it had ever happened. I just stared at him. Rebecca, sensing the sudden shift, asked if something was wrong. I managed to say, "I'm just surprised. Brendan and we work together." Rebecca's eyes lit up. What a small world. How perfect. My boyfriend and sister already know each other. Brendan was sweating through his shirt, trying to force a smile. It was awful, but there was a flicker of something close to satisfaction, stirring inside me. Rebecca started telling me how Brendan had been so interested in our family, always asking questions about our upbringing and our mother. She thought it was sweet that he wanted to understand our background. She mentioned how particularly curious he'd been about our mom's job and education level, thinking he was being thoughtful about potential class differences. I just sat there, listening, watching Brendan realize he'd been dating the daughter of the woman he'd been publicly mocking for months, the woman whose entire life he'd invented a degrading backstory for. Then Rebecca dropped the bomb. Mom's so excited to meet him. This weekend. She's planned a big dinner to welcome him to the family. Brendan started coughing, sputtering, saying maybe they should take things slower. Rebecca scoffed. Nonsense. You've been pushing to meet her for weeks. And then the ultimate mic drop. Mom even took time off from her job as a federal judge to cook your favorite meal. Brendan's face went from white to green. Truly. I leaned forward, calm as could be. Yes, I said a little too sweetly. Our mother, the Harvard law graduate turned federal judge, is very excited to meet the man who's been so interested in her background. Rebecca, still not quite grasping the full picture, innocently added that Mom had looked Brendan up and was concerned about some workplace complaints, but was willing to give him a chance. Brendan, voice barely a whisper, asked, "What complaints?" That was my moment. My heart was pounding, but I stayed ice cold. I pulled out my phone. "These complaints," I said, showing him my screen. Every email I'd sent to HR about his harassment, every single one naming him, detailing his comments about single mothers. I'd been blind copying my personal email this entire time. HR might not care, I told him, looking him dead in the eyes. But my mother's best friend, who runs a legal firm specializing in workplace harassment, she definitely will. Brendan tried to leave. Rebecca grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "What is going on?" "Everything," I said, and then I told her. I started with that very first morning, the day he walked past my desk and made his initial comment about single mothers not teaching their kids proper work habits. Rebecca's face, already confused, turned sick as I described how he'd cite those fake studies, how he'd use our meetings to insinuate children from broken homes made more mistakes. When I got to the promotion incident, how he'd announced to everyone that companies hired people with sob stories out of pity, Brendan tried to interrupt. Rebecca's hand shot up, silencing him. Her skin looked gray under the restaurant lights. I explained his food stamp jokes, asking if my mom taught me to pack food or if I learned it from the state. Rebecca's whole body went stiff when I mentioned his vile comments about our mother having multiple kids from different fathers, even though he knew nothing about our family. I recounted the community college comments, how he'd told the entire department that single moms sent their kids there when they couldn't afford a real education. Brendan sat frozen, absolutely still, as I listed every single article he'd left on my desk about psychological damage from growing up without fathers. Rebecca's hand started shaking when I got to the part about him telling our manager I probably had anger problems from my unstable childhood. I pulled up my phone again, opening the folder where I'd saved every email to HR. Rebecca leaned over, eyes glued to the screen, while Brendan's face turned beet red. I scrolled through 6 months of complaints. I read one out loud, where he'd claimed our mother probably cleaned houses or worked at a gas station. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she reached for my phone, scrolling faster, desperate to see the next email. I showed her the one where he'd created that fictional backstory for our mom, the one with multiple boyfriends and poor life choices. Her voice came out shaky, barely a whisper. "When did you send the first complaint?" "My second week of work," I told her. She scrolled faster, the horrible realization dawning in her eyes. He'd been asking about our family background the entire time he was tormenting me. I read another, where he'd highlighted parts of articles about trust issues and relationship problems in children of single parents. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth when she saw the email about him saying, "Our mother probably had me young, and that's why I was immature." Rebecca stood up so fast her chair scraped loud against the floor, a piercing sound in the stunned restaurant. "We're done," she told Brendan, her voice shaking with fury. "This dinner is over. We are over." He grabbed her arm. "I didn't know you were related," he stammered. She yanked away from him. Her voice, though still trembling, grew loud enough that other tables turned to look. "That's exactly the problem," she yelled. "You thought it was fine to mock someone's mother as long as you weren't dating her daughter." Brendan tried to explain. "It was just workplace banter. You're being too sensitive." Rebecca cut him off. "There is nothing harmless about spending 6 months tearing down someone's family every single day." She stepped back from the table as he reached for her again. "I can't believe," she choked out. "I told you stories about our childhood, about our mom, that you could have used against my sister at work." Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the back of her chair to steady herself. I stayed calm, my voice steady. "I have physical copies of everything," I told her, making sure Brendan could hear me, "including the articles he left on my desk." His face went from red to purple. "Every single piece of paper he put on my desk about father absence and broken homes, and documentation of him telling our manager not to give me high-stress projects because of my supposed anger issues." Rebecca looked at me, her eyes brimming. "How long have you been collecting evidence?" "Since the first week," I said. Brendan finally found his voice, a pathetic whine. "It was all just jokes between coworkers." Rebecca laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. "You are delusional," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "If you think spending half a year degrading my sister counts as jokes." She turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. "How could you sit through all those family dinners, listening to me talk about my wonderful boyfriend, without saying anything?" I explained that she'd never mentioned his name, and I'd only ever referred to him as the office jackass when complaining about work. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense," she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. "I had no idea the guy making my life miserable was the same person you were falling for." Brendan, still desperate, leaned forward. "I'll apologize to her at work on Monday," he promised. "We can all just move past this." Rebecca stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You actually think," she said, her voice getting quieter, but somehow scarier, "that I'd stay with someone who tormented my sister for months?" She paused, then added, "And I'm definitely telling our mother everything." Brendan's face went white again. "Maybe we should all calm down," he pleaded, "and talk about this rationally." "There's nothing to talk about," Rebecca said, picking up her purse. "I've been an idiot for not seeing what kind of person you really are." I stood up, placing money on the table for my untouched meal. Brendan tried one last time to grab Rebecca's hand, but she jerked away like he'd burned her. We walked out of the restaurant. I looked back once. Brendan was still sitting at the table, his head in his hands. On the sidewalk, Rebecca linked her arm through mine. "I'm so sorry for bringing him into our lives," she whispered. "Are you okay after dealing with his abuse for months?" "Honestly," I said, a surge of defiant energy pushing through me, "I'm relieved, because now I have even more proof that he has a pattern of targeting women and their families." She stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "Him dating you," I explained, "while harassing me. It shows he specifically went after women and used their personal information against them." Rebecca's eyes went wide as she finally understood. "What's your plan now?" she asked. "I've been documenting everything," I told her, a newfound steel in my voice, "and waiting for the right moment to go over our useless HR department's head. Mom's friend, the one who runs that legal firm specializing in workplace harassment. She's going to care about my complaints." Rebecca squeezed my arm tighter. "I want to help," she said, "however I can." She drove us to my apartment, and we sat in her car for over an hour, just talking. She kept saying she should have seen the signs, and I kept telling her manipulative people were masters at hiding who they really were. She remembered how Brendan always changed the subject when she tried to tell him detailed stories about her family, how he'd seemed obsessed with finding out what her mother did for work and whether she'd gone to college. Rebecca laughed that bitter laugh again. "I thought he was being thoughtful," she said, "about potential class differences. He was actually gathering information to use against you." I showed her more of the emails on my phone, and she read through them hand over her mouth. She stopped on one where Brendan had told another coworker that people raised by single mothers never learned proper boundaries. Rebecca snorted. "That's rich coming from someone who just spent 6 months crossing every boundary possible." She asked if anyone at work had stood up for me. I admitted a few people had looked uncomfortable, but nobody had actually told him to stop. I pulled up my personal email folder, the one where I'd been blind copying myself on every HR complaint for 6 months. Rebecca leaned closer as I scrolled. The email started way back in September, when Brendan first made comments about my community college education, and went all the way through last week. Each one had the date, the exact time what Brendan said word for word, and who else was around to hear it. Rebecca's eyes got wider as she read, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw how detailed my documentation was. Everything. The fake statistics. The made-up stories about our mother. "Why didn't you tell me any of this was happening?" she asked, tears starting to form. "I didn't want to dump my work problems on you," I explained, "when you seemed so happy with your new relationship." "This wasn't just work problems," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This was someone attacking our family." I showed her the email from 3 months ago, the one where Brendan told our manager I probably had anger issues from my unstable childhood. Rebecca grabbed my phone, read it twice, then handed it back. "I can't believe I was dating someone capable of this kind of cruelty," she whispered. "I feel sick thinking about all the conversations we had about our family." "It wasn't your fault," I insisted. "Manipulative people are good at showing different sides of themselves to different people." She wiped her eyes. "I need to call Mom right now." I looked at the time. Almost 9:30 at night. Maybe we should wait until morning? "No way," Rebecca cut me off. "No way am I waiting when our mother's daughter has been harassed for months, and the person doing it is supposed to meet her this weekend." She pulled out her phone, found Mom's number, and put on speaker. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" "Rebecca never calls this late." Rebecca's voice cracked. "Mom, I just broke up with Brendan because he's been harassing my sister at work for 6 months." Complete silence on the other end. It felt like forever. Then Mom's voice came through. "What, Rebecca?" And I called her Judge Voice. Calm, yes, but with an edge that meant she was absolutely furious. "Come to my house," she said, "right now, and bring every piece of documentation you have." "We'll be there in 20 minutes, Rebecca said and hung up. We drove faster than usual through the empty streets. Neither of us said much. We were both processing the whirlwind of the last 2 hours. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. When we pulled into Mom's driveway, all the lights in her home office were blazing. Mom opened the door before we could even knock. She was still in her work clothes, reading glasses pushed up on her head, holding a yellow legal pad. She pulled me into a tight hug first. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I admitted I wanted to handle it myself, without running to my federal judge mother every time I had a problem at work. She held me at arm's length, looking me in the eyes. "This wasn't about running to me," she said. "This was about someone creating a hostile work environment. You should have told me months ago." We followed her to her home office. Rebecca and I sat on the leather couch. Mom sat at her desk, put on her reading glasses. I pulled up the email folder on my phone. "Send everything to my computer," she instructed, "so I can read it properly." I forwarded the entire folder, watching her open the first email on her large monitor. "Rebecca," and I stayed quiet while Mom read. Her face grew darker with each email. I could see her making notes on the legal pad. She read for almost 30 minutes, not saying a word, the only sound her pen scratching across the paper. When she finally looked up, her expression was the one she probably used in court when delivering a harsh sentence. "This isn't just harassment," she stated, her voice dangerously quiet. "This is a hostile work environment, potentially discrimination based on family status." She asked if HR had ever responded with anything more than generic acknowledgments. I explained they always sent back template responses, saying they took my concerns seriously and would look into it, but nothing ever changed. I told her Brendan's behavior actually got worse after I started reporting it, like he knew nobody was going to stop him. Mom wrote something else on her legal pad and underlined it twice. Rebecca was openly crying now, repeating that she should have seen who Brendan really was. Mom put down her pen and sat on the coffee table in front of us. "This isn't your fault, Rebecca," she said gently. "Manipulative people are experts at compartmentalizing, at showing completely different personalities to different people. Brendan clearly knew how to be charming when he wanted something, and how to be cruel when he thought he could get away with it." Rebecca wiped her face. "What are we going to do now?" Mom stood up, walked back to her desk, and picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts. "Who are you calling?" I asked. "Constance," she replied. Even though it was almost 10 at night, the phone rang 3 times before Constance answered. Mom launched into an explanation, using legal terms I barely understood. Documented harassment, employer liability, failure to investigate complaints, hostile work environment, potential discrimination claims. I sat there, listening to 6 months of my suffering being transformed into proper legal language, specific statutes and precedents. Constance must have asked questions because Mom kept providing more details, referencing specific emails by date. The call lasted about 15 minutes. I heard Mom say she'd have me send all the documentation over first thing in the morning. When she hung up, she turned back to face us. "Constance agrees," she announced. "This sounds like a clear case of workplace harassment with significant employer liability because they failed to address repeated complaints." Mom sat back down on the coffee table. "We are going to make sure," she said, her eyes burning with resolve. Both Brendan and the firm's negligent HR department face real consequences for what they've allowed to happen. She asked if I was okay, and that's when everything I'd been holding in for 6 months finally broke through. I started crying and I couldn't stop. Rebecca moved closer, putting her arm around my shoulders. Mom got down on her knees in front of the couch and took both my hands in hers. "I am so proud of you," she said, her voice full of emotion, "for documenting everything so carefully. But I am furious that you felt you had to handle this completely alone." She told me, "That's what family is for. Asking for help isn't weakness." I nodded, unable to speak through my sobs. Rebecca was crying again, too, and Mom pulled both of us into a hug. We stayed like that for a while. When I finally got myself under control, Mom went to her desk, came back with a box of tissues, and handed them to us. Then she went to the kitchen and returned with 3 mugs of tea on a tray. She set them on the coffee table and sat back down with her legal pad. Rebecca wrapped her hands around her mug, needing the warmth. Mom explained that Constance would probably send a formal letter to my firm's main office, laying out everything they failed to do. The letter would mention the potential lawsuit if they didn't fix things right away and take real action. Rebecca asked what would happen to Brendan. Mom said it depended on how the firm handled it, but he should definitely get fired for making my workplace so awful. She added that his behavior might make it hard for him to get another job in accounting if people found out why he got terminated. I admitted I felt nervous about going back to work on Monday, knowing Brendan would know I'd told Rebecca everything. Mom said I should take Monday off while Constance sent the legal paperwork. "You shouldn't have to face him alone after everything that happened tonight." Rebecca said she wanted to stay at my apartment for the next few days, so I wouldn't be by myself. Mom agreed that was smart and said She'd call me every day to check in. If I felt unsafe, we could even look into getting a restraining order against Brendan. We stayed up talking until almost midnight about lawyers, workplace rules, and what might happen over the next few weeks. I felt completely drained, but also lighter than I had in months, like something heavy had finally lifted off my shoulders. Rebecca drove us back to my place, still apologizing for dating Brendan. I kept telling her she had no way of knowing, but she insisted she should have trusted my judgment when I complained about work being toxic. When we got to my apartment, she helped me carry in her overnight bag and set up the couch. I fell asleep within minutes. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of eggs and toast. Rebecca, who'd slept on my uncomfortable couch, was in the kitchen making breakfast. When I walked out, she told me she'd already called her boss and taken a sick day, so she could stay with me while we waited for Constance to call. We ate breakfast, and I felt weird not getting ready for work, not dreading the walk past Brendan's desk, not bracing myself for whatever cruel comment he'd make today. My phone rang at exactly 10 o'clock. Constance's name popped up. I put it on speaker so Rebecca could hear. Constance asked really specific questions about every HR complaint, Brendan's exact words, who witnessed his behavior. I gave her the names of 3 coworkers, including Hallie, who'd privately told me she thought Brendan was out of line. Constance took notes and asked follow-up questions for almost an hour. She explained she was writing a formal demand letter to my firm's top executives and their legal team. The letter would list all the harassment, point out how HR ignored my repeated complaints, and explain the legal trouble the firm faced for letting it continue. She said this would probably make the firm start a real investigation right away and suspend Brendan while they looked into everything. By Monday afternoon, Constance had sent the demand letter. My phone rang. It was Amelia Stafford from HR. Her voice sounded completely different from the dismissive tone in her previous emails. Now, she was professional, concerned. She asked if I could come in Tuesday morning for a meeting to discuss my complaints. I said yes. When I hung up, Rebecca asked how I felt. Scared, I admitted, but also relieved that someone was finally taking this seriously. Rebecca spent the rest of the day helping me prepare. We went through all my documentation again, organized the emails, made a list of specific incidents with witnesses. She helped me practice staying calm, sticking to facts instead of getting emotional. She'd taken the whole week off from her job to support me. Mom had cleared her schedule too, just in case. Tuesday morning, my hands felt sweaty holding the folder with all my printed emails. Amelia met me in the lobby and walked me to a conference room I'd never been in before. 2 other HR people were already there, a woman with short gray hair and a younger guy with glasses. At the end of the table sat a woman in a dark suit. She introduced herself as being from the firm's legal department. Her grip was firm, professional. Amelia asked if they could record the meeting. I agreed. The legal woman pressed a button, stated the date, time, and everyone present. Please, she said, walk us through the entire 6 months of harassment from the beginning. I started with my first day, mentioning my mom, how Brendan began, making comments the very next morning. The HR people took notes. The legal woman watched me closely. I described how he'd walk past my desk every single morning and say something about single mothers lacking discipline. The woman with gray hair asked me to be as specific as possible. I pulled out my phone, opening the Notes app where I'd been writing down his comments with dates and times. I read several entries out loud, including the one where he said, "Children from broken homes made more errors at work." The legal woman asked if anyone else heard these comments. I gave her name, plus 2 other coworkers. I explained how the harassment got worse after my promotion, how Brendan told everyone it was a diversity hire because the company felt sorry for people with sob stories. The younger HR guy stopped writing, looking up at me with genuine concern. I showed them the email I'd sent to HR about that incident and how the response was just 1 sentence. Amelia shifted in her chair, avoiding eye contact. I kept going through my documentation, describing Brendan's food stamp jokes. The legal woman asked pointed questions about each incident, who was present, whether my manager witnessed any of it. I told her Tyson had been in the room for several comments, but usually just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. I pulled out the printed emails from my folder and slid them across the table. The stack was thick, maybe 30 pages, each one documenting a separate incident. The legal woman picked them up and started reading. She asked about HR's responses. I showed her the generic brush-off emails, each one basically the same. Amelia picked one up, read it, then set it down and rubbed her forehead. I explained nothing ever changed, that Brendan's behavior escalated because he knew HR wasn't doing anything. The woman with gray hair asked if I ever felt threatened. Not physically, I said honestly, but emotionally. He made me feel worthless every single day. I described the articles he left on my desk, how he highlighted sections about trust issues and relationship problems. The younger HR guy asked if I still had them. No, I said, I threw them away. Seeing them made me feel sick. The legal woman set down the emails and asked about the most recent incidents. I told her about Brendan creating a fictional backstory for my mother, spreading those made-up stories around the office. Amelia looked genuinely uncomfortable now, glancing at the legal woman. And all of this, I concluded, came to a head when I discovered Brendan was dating my sister, Rebecca. The HR people exchanged looks. The legal woman leaned forward. Please explain that situation. I walked them through the restaurant dinner. How Rebecca had no idea we worked together, because I'd never mentioned Brendan by name. I described his face going white when he realized who I was. How Rebecca thought it was wonderful. The younger HR guy asked if my sister knew about the harassment. Not until that night, I said, when I told her everything at the table. Amelia asked what happened next. I explained how Rebecca broke up with him immediately, how my mother got involved, because she's a federal judge and her best friend, Constance, runs a legal firm specializing in workplace harassment. The legal woman wrote something on her notepad. Has Constance reviewed your documentation? She asked. Yes, I confirmed. She sent a formal demand letter to the firm's executives and legal team on Monday. Amelia looked at the legal woman. They seemed to have a silent conversation. Then Amelia turned to me. I need to apologize, she said, her voice surprisingly sincere. She admitted HR had failed to take my complaints seriously, that they should have investigated thoroughly after the first incident. Reading through all your emails now, she said, seeing the pattern of harassment and our inadequate responses, made me realize how badly we'd let you down. The legal woman added that the firm took these matters very seriously, and they were launching a full investigation starting immediately. Amelia said Brendan had been placed on administrative leave as of this morning. He wouldn't be returning to the office during the investigation. I felt something release in my chest, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. The woman with gray hair asked if I felt safe at work. I paused before answering honestly. No, I said. I hadn't felt safe in months. I dreaded coming in every single day, wondering what Brendan would say or do. I explained how I'd started arriving early and leaving late to avoid him, how I ate lunch at my desk instead of the break room because he was always there making comments. The legal woman asked if I'd feel more comfortable working from home during the investigation. Yes, I said immediately. She made a note. Starting tomorrow, I could work remotely until the investigation concluded and we determined next steps. The meeting kept going. I answered more questions about specific incidents, about other people Brendan might have targeted, about whether I'd experienced any retaliation. I told them about the time he suggested to Tyson that I shouldn't be given high-stress projects because of my supposed anger issues. The younger HR guy asked if that affected my work assignments. I'm not sure, I admitted, but I noticed Tyson seemed hesitant to give me certain client accounts after that conversation. Amelia wrote something down. Tyson would be interviewed. The legal woman asked if there was anything else I wanted to add. I mentioned how Brendan had specifically targeted my community college background, announcing to the entire department that it was where single moms sent their kids when they couldn't afford real education. The woman with gray hair shook her head. That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable. 3 hours had passed when we finally finished. I felt completely drained, but also validated in a way I hadn't expected. Amelia stood up, saying they'd be interviewing witnesses this week, promising preliminary findings within 10 days. She handed me a business card with her direct cell number. "Call me immediately," she said, "if you have any concerns or if anyone tries to contact you about the investigation inappropriately." I walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down to the parking garage. I sat in my car for a minute before starting the engine. I pulled out my phone and called Mom first. "How did it go?" she asked. I told her about the 3-hour meeting, the recording, Brendan on administrative leave, working from home. Mom said that was exactly what should happen, and she was proud of my thorough documentation. She asked if I felt okay. "Exhausted," I admitted, but relieved. I hung up and immediately called Constance. I gave her the summary of the meeting. She said the firm was clearly taking this seriously now because they understood their massive liability exposure. My documentation and their failure to respond properly put them in a very bad legal position. "This is exactly the response we wanted," Constance said. "The demand letter did its job." She told me to keep records of everything going forward. Every email from HR, every phone call, every interaction related to the investigation. I promised I would, and thanked her. I drove home and found Rebecca waiting at my apartment with takeout. She'd used her spare key and set up lunch on my coffee table. I sat down next to her and told her everything while we ate. HR apologizing, Brendan on leave, working from home. Rebecca hugged me. "I'm so relieved you won't have to see him every day anymore." She mentioned she'd already scheduled her first therapy appointment for Thursday to process everything. Over the next week, I set up my home office in my spare bedroom. Rebecca gradually went back to her normal schedule, but called me every day. She told me therapy was helping her understand how Brendan had compartmentalized his cruelty, how he'd shown her a completely different version of himself. Her therapist explained that manipulative people were experts at presenting different personalities to different audiences. I worked from home and actually got more done without the constant stress of wondering when Brendan would show up at my desk. My phone rang on Thursday afternoon. Hallie's name popped up. She said HR had interviewed her that morning, and she'd told them everything she witnessed. Hallie described how HR asked really specific questions about Brendan's comments, whether other coworkers heard them. She'd given them 2 more names of people who'd complained privately about Brendan's behavior. "Several people are coming forward now," Hallie told me, "who were afraid to speak up before. The investigation is uncovering a pattern of inappropriate behavior toward multiple women." Friday morning, Tyson called. His voice sounded genuinely apologetic. He wanted to reach out personally to apologize for not intervening more forcefully when he witnessed Brendan's comments. He admitted he'd thought it was just typical office tension, personality conflicts, that he hadn't realized the extent of the harassment. He'd given a formal statement to HR supporting my account. He said he should have shut Brendan down immediately. I thanked him. 10 days after my initial meeting, Amelia's name showed up on my screen. She asked if I could come in for a follow-up meeting the next day. Her voice was professional, but I could hear something serious underneath it. The investigation had concluded, she said, and they'd found substantial evidence supporting my complaints. They wanted to discuss the findings and next steps with me in person. I agreed. After I hung up, I sat on my couch, nervous, but also ready to hear what they'd found. Tuesday morning, I drove to the firm's main office, taking the elevator to the 5th floor where the executive conference rooms were. Amelia met me and walked me to a large corner room with windows overlooking the city. 2 people were already seated, the legal representative from the firm's employment law team, and Owen Blackwell, one of the 3 senior partners who ran the entire company. Owen stood up and shook my hand with both of his, looking directly at me with genuine concern. He asked me to sit down. "I want to start," he said, his voice steady and serious, "by apologizing personally for what you've experienced at this firm. The company failed to protect you, and we take full responsibility for not addressing your complaints properly." He explained that after reviewing the investigation findings, it was clear the HR department had not followed proper procedures and had dismissed legitimate harassment concerns. The legal representative opened a folder, walking me through their findings, explaining that multiple witnesses had corroborated my account and they'd found documented evidence of Brendan's pattern of inappropriate behavior. Amelia added that the investigation had revealed systemic problems with how the firm handled harassment complaints, and they were committed to fixing those failures. Owen leaned forward, his expression even more serious. "Brendan has been terminated," he announced, effective immediately, for violating the firm's harassment policies and creating a hostile work environment. He explained the decision had been made at the highest level of the company and was final. The legal representative added that Brendan's personnel file would reflect the termination was for cause related to harassment findings, which would be disclosed to any future employers who requested references. Owen continued, explaining that the investigation had identified multiple failures in the HR complaint process: inadequate response times, lack of proper investigation protocols, insufficient training. The firm was implementing mandatory training for all HR staff and managers, creating a new independent complaint hotline, and assigning an external consultant to audit their procedures. Amelia mentioned she'd be working directly with the consultant. I sat there, processing it all, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering anger that it had taken this long to get action. The legal representative slid a document across the table. "This is a settlement offer the firm wants to present." She walked me through each section. It included back pay to compensate for the emotional distress I'd suffered. The amount made my eyes widen. It was more than I expected. The offer also covered any therapy or counseling costs, with no cap on sessions. There was a clause guaranteeing no retaliation if I chose to return to the office, with specific language about protected employment status and monitoring. Owen emphasized they wanted me to feel safe and supported if I decided to stay. The legal representative said I should take time to review the offer with my own counsel before signing anything, extending the review period to 2 weeks. "I'll have my mother's friend, Constance, look it over," I said, since she specializes in employment law. Owen nodded. "That's absolutely the right approach. We want to make sure you feel the offer is fair and complete." I looked at the document again. "Could you add a positive reference letter?" I asked, "that I could use for future opportunities, whether I stay or move on." Owen agreed immediately. I also asked about transferring to a different team if I decided to return, somewhere with different clients and a separate management structure. The legal representative made notes. Owen said they absolutely could arrange that. "We value your work," he said, "and the positive feedback we've received from clients and colleagues. We want to make this right in whatever way will help you feel comfortable." He added that I could take as much time as I needed to decide. The offer would remain open. My job was secure, protected with no pressure or timeline. Amelia mentioned that if I did return, she'd personally ensure my transition went smoothly, and I'd have direct access to her if any concerns came up. I left the meeting with a copy of the settlement offer and drove straight to Rebecca's apartment. She'd taken the day off, waiting for my call, and opened her door before I even finished knocking. I sat down on her couch and told her everything. When I got to the part about Brendan being fired, her whole body relaxed, like she'd been holding tension for days. She admitted she'd been worried he might try to retaliate, show up at my apartment. Knowing he was completely out of both our lives helped her feel safer. She asked if the firm had put any restrictions on him contacting me, and I explained the settlement included language about that. Rebecca hugged me. "I'm so relieved this part is over," she said, "even though I know you still have to decide what to do next." That evening, Mom picked us both up and drove us to her favorite downtown restaurant, the one with the private booths and the menu she'd been going to since before we were born. She ordered champagne, even though it was a Tuesday, and raised her glass to toast the investigation outcome. Mom said she was proud of how I'd handled everything, from documenting the harassment to standing up for myself when the system failed. She looked at both of us. "You taught yourself an important lesson," she said, "about advocating for yourself, even when institutions don't fulfill their responsibility to protect you." Rebecca added that she'd learned something, too, about trusting family and speaking up. We spent 2 hours at dinner talking about next steps. Mom reminded me the decision was entirely mine. Constance had already texted, asking to see the settlement offer. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked from home, pondering whether to return to the office. Constance called after reviewing the settlement. It was a fair offer, she said, clearly acknowledging the firm's liability. The language was strong and protective, the financial compensation appropriate. She recommended a few small clarifications in the reference letter language and the retaliation protections, which the firm's legal team accepted without pushback. I signed the agreement on a Friday afternoon, Constance on video call as my witness. The following Monday, I emailed Owen. I wanted to return and transfer to a different team. He responded within an hour, saying he was glad I was staying and would personally oversee my transition. My new supervisor, Patricia, reached out 2 days before my first day back. She managed a team in a separate wing of the building. She called me directly, welcoming me, assuring me she was aware of the situation. She was committed to maintaining a respectful environment, had already spoken with the team about professional conduct expectations. Her door was always open, she said. Her voice was warm, professional. Some of my anxiety eased. My first week back was strange. Everyone knew what had happened. The firm had sent out a memo about updated harassment policies and mandatory training, and people could read between the lines. Several coworkers I barely knew stopped by my new desk to say hello. A few privately told me they were glad I'd spoken up, including one woman who'd had problems with Brendan but hadn't reported them. Hallie came to find me on my second day and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. We went to the sandwich place, and she filled me in on the office gossip. The mandatory training had been awkward, she said, because everyone knew why it was happening. Hallie and I started having lunch together regularly. It felt good to have an ally. About a month after I returned, Hallie mentioned over coffee that she'd heard through the office network Brendan was having trouble finding another job. Word had spread in the accounting industry about why he'd been terminated. Firms were wary of hiring someone with documented harassment findings. Our firm's general counsel had made sure his personnel file accurately reflected the investigation results. Any reference checks would reveal the truth. I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and something else I couldn't quite name. Part of me was glad he was facing real consequences, but another part just felt tired of thinking about him at all. 3 months after everything happened, Rebecca texted me. Dinner? When I got to the restaurant, she seemed nervous but excited. She'd started dating again, slowly, more cautiously. She'd met someone at a friend's party, and they'd been on several dates. She was taking her time, really paying attention to how he treated other people, not just her. Her therapist, she said, helped her trust her instincts better. I asked how it was going. She smiled. It's nice, she said, to feel more confident in my own judgment now. We talked about how the whole situation with Brendan had changed both of us, and how sometimes the worst experiences taught you the most important things about yourself. A few weeks later, I got an email from Constance. Would I be interested in speaking to a young lawyers group she mentored? They were learning about workplace harassment law, and she thought hearing from someone who'd actually documented and reported harassment would be valuable. I stared at the email, nervous about sharing my experience. But I kept thinking about how alone I'd felt during those 6 months, and how I wished I'd known other people had gone through similar things. I replied yes. Rebecca helped me prepare, listening to my practice runs. The night of the speaking engagement, I walked into a conference room with about 15 young lawyers. Constance introduced me. I started talking about my experience, explaining how I documented every incident, even when HR seemed uninterested. I showed them examples of my emails. Several people took notes. After the presentation, 3 women stayed behind. One told me she'd been dealing with a partner at her firm who made inappropriate comments. She'd started keeping notes, but wasn't sure what to do next. I gave her Constance's contact information. Another woman thanked me for sharing, saying it made her feel less alone. The third asked if she could email me with questions about documentation. I agreed. Driving home that night, I felt good about speaking up, about helping other people understand they had options. 6 months after that dinner, Owen called me into his office. I walked in feeling slightly nervous. He smiled. "I wanted to personally inform you," he said, "that you are promoted to senior accountant, effective immediately." I felt a rush of relief and excitement. The promotion was based entirely on my excellent work performance and strong client relationships. He said several clients had specifically requested me for their accounts, and my technical skills were exactly what the firm needed. Owen handed me the official letter. "I'm glad you stayed with the firm after everything that happened." I thanked him, walking back to my desk, feeling proud of myself for earning this promotion through my actual work, not anyone's pity. Hallie saw my face and immediately asked what happened, then shrieked and hugged me when I told her. She insisted on taking me out for drinks to celebrate. I agreed, texting Rebecca the good news. Rebecca responded with about 20 excited emojis and said we needed a special sister dinner. We'd been having weekly sister dinners for months. They were my favorite part of the week. That week, we met at a Thai place. She brought a small gift bag, a fancy pen engraved with my initials, and senior accountant. Tears started. She laughed. "Don't cry over a pen." We ordered our usual dishes. She started telling me about her therapy session that week, how the situation with Brendan had actually brought us closer together. I agreed it was weird how something so awful had strengthened our relationship. Rebecca joked that at least Brendan's awfulness had given us something positive. I raised my glass. My new team was completely different from my old environment. I was realizing just how toxic things had been before. Patricia checked in regularly, but never hovering. My teammates were professional, respectful. Nobody made weird comments. We had team lunches where people actually talked about their work, shared ideas. I found myself looking forward to work instead of dreading it. The projects were interesting, challenging. My opinions were valued. I was enjoying my job again, feeling confident in my career in a way I hadn't felt since before Brendan. One afternoon, I was working on a complex tax analysis, so focused I'd forgotten to check my phone for 3 hours. That used to happen all the time before Brendan. During those 6 months, I'd been constantly on edge, checking my email every few minutes to document his latest comments. Getting back to that state of focused concentration felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. I ran into Amelia in the elevator one morning, about 8 months after the investigation. We'd exchanged polite hellos, but hadn't really talked. She asked how I was doing. "Things were going well on my new team," I said. Amelia smiled. "I'm glad to hear it." Then she mentioned the firm had completely overhauled their harassment complaint procedures based on what happened with my case. Every HR staff member had gone through extensive training. They'd also implemented a new system where complaints were reviewed by multiple people with clear timelines. Amelia said the training had been eye-opening for a lot of people. She thanked me for pushing back and forcing the firm to do better. The changes are already making a difference for other employees. The elevator reached my floor. I stepped out, feeling satisfied that at least some good had come from my awful experience. At Sunday dinner at Mom's house a few weeks later, she mentioned she'd heard something interesting from a colleague. Brendan had apparently tried to apply for a position at a firm where one of her fellow judges had connections. The judge had made sure the hiring committee knew about his history of workplace harassment and the circumstances of his termination. Mom said this matter-of-factly while passing me the salad bowl, but I could see a slight smile on her face. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied, knowing his actions had a lasting impact on his career. Another part just felt tired of thinking about him at all. Rebecca asked if that meant he was having trouble finding work. Mom said she'd heard through her network that several firms had passed on his applications. I took a bite of chicken. I decided I was okay with feeling satisfied about the consequences, while also being ready to stop dwelling on it. 2 months later, Rebecca texted me, asking if I wanted to meet her new boyfriend. She'd been dating him for 2 months. I agreed to. Brunch. I showed up feeling protective, but trying to stay open-minded. Rebecca introduced him as Noah. He stood up, shook my hand with a genuine smile. He asked about my work, listened when I talked about my promotion, asking follow-up questions. During brunch, he was kind to the server, split the check. He asked both Rebecca and me questions about growing up together, genuinely interested. When Rebecca went to the bathroom, he told me he was grateful to meet me, that Rebecca talked about me all the time. I could see Rebecca was being more careful this time, watching how he treated other people. After brunch, when we were saying goodbye, Rebecca pulled me aside. "What do you think?" she asked. "He seems really nice," I told her. "And I can tell you're taking your time and trusting your instincts better." She smiled. "My therapist would be proud to hear you say that." A year after that restaurant dinner, when everything exploded with Brendan, my life looked completely different. I was thriving at work, a senior accountant with leadership responsibilities on 3 major client accounts. Owen had assigned me to mentor 2 junior accountants, and I discovered I actually enjoyed teaching. I'd also become an informal resource for other employees with workplace concerns. Hallie and I were close friends. My relationship with Rebecca was stronger than ever. Watching her build a healthy relationship with Noah made me so happy. I'd even started dating someone I met through a friend, taking things slowly but feeling optimistic. My apartment had become a space I enjoyed instead of just a place to hide from work stress. I was sleeping better, going to yoga. Looking at where I was now, compared to a year ago, felt almost surreal. Rebecca called me on a Wednesday evening. "Come over," she said. "I have big news." I drove to her apartment. She opened the door with a huge smile, her left hand extended. An engagement ring sparkled on her finger. Noah had proposed the night before. I hugged her. She started crying happy tears, telling me all the details. She asked if I would be her maid of honor. Yes, I said immediately. We spent the next 2 hours looking at wedding ideas. The following weekend, we had an engagement celebration at Mom's house. Rebecca stood up to make a toast. She thanked everyone, then looked at me specifically. "I'm grateful," she said, her voice catching, "for a sister who showed me what it means to stand up for yourself and not accept treatment that makes you feel small." She said watching me handle everything with Brendan taught her to trust her own judgment. I felt tears starting as she raised her glass. To family and to sisters who have each other's backs, no matter what. I started meeting with Tyson every other week to talk about the partner track application process. He walked me through the requirements, explaining what the senior partners looked for. We met after hours. He reviewed my draft materials, gave feedback. He said the harassment situation actually demonstrated something valuable about my character, that I could handle adversity while maintaining professional standards and producing excellent work. I hadn't thought about it that way before. We set a timeline for my application. Tyson said he'd sponsor me. His support made the whole thing feel possible. Mom called on a Saturday morning, inviting Rebecca and me over for dinner. When we arrived, the house smelled amazing. Mom had made lasagna. After dinner, she brought out coffee. "I've been thinking about everything that happened with Brendan," she said, "and how you both handled it." She looked at me. "I'm proud of how you advocated for yourself, while staying professional and documenting everything properly." She admitted she'd wanted to intervene immediately, use her position and connections. "But watching you handle it yourself," she said, "taught me something important about trusting my daughters to fight their own battles. Seeing you stand up for yourself without running to me for help showed me we'd become strong, capable adults." Rebecca squeezed my hand. Mom turned to Rebecca. "I'm also proud of how you handled the betrayal and ended the relationship immediately instead of making excuses for Brendan. It took courage to walk away from someone you cared about when you discovered who they really were." We sat there for a while, but I kept thinking about what Mom said. Trusting us. Sometimes I think about that restaurant dinner, that single moment of truth. Everything changed in those few hours when Rebecca introduced me to her boyfriend, and I realized it was Brendan. One conversation altered the direction of multiple lives. Brendan lost his career momentum, his reputation. I gained confidence in my ability to stand up for myself. The firm changed its harassment policies, meaning other employees might be protected better in the future. Rebecca learned to trust her own judgment. That one moment created ripples that spread out in all directions. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Rebecca had never invited me to meet her boyfriend, if Brendan had kept those two parts of his life separate forever. But then I remember that people like him eventually get caught because their cruelty leaves a trail someone will follow. Life looks completely different now compared to those 6 months when I dreaded going to work every morning. I'm successful at my job with real leadership responsibilities and a clear path to partnership. My relationship with Rebecca is closer than it's ever been. Mom and I have a different dynamic now. I'm more confident in my ability to advocate for myself when institutions fail to protect me, knowing I have the documentation, skills, and determination to make people listen. The harassment was awful, truly, and I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but it taught me something valuable about my own strength. I learned that speaking up is worth every uncomfortable moment, every awkward HR meeting, every time I had to recount what Brendan said and did. Staying silent would have been easier in the short term, but speaking up changed everything for the better. I have the life I want now, one where I feel safe at work and valued for my contributions. And I know I earned it by refusing to accept treatment that made me feel small. Have you ever faced a moment like that, where one conversation completely changed the trajectory of your life, or had to fight a battle you never wanted but came out stronger? Tell me your story in the comments below. I really want to know.